That's my brain. And I want to share with you the story about how I broke it and some of the things that I've learnt as it's kind of healed over time. I don't know how well you'll remember the 30th of January 2011. Blank looks. It was a Sunday. I probably got up too late and shoved some toast into the kids, you know, like you do, and put the arches on. And then the ordinary family climbed in the ordinary car and we all sort of set off for an ordinary drive. We'd been driving for about half an hour when everything became anything but ordinary. It was at about 12 o'clock, midday, when a nail punctured the tyre of the car and the car spun off the road and hit a tree. I'm told that the whole thing probably took less than a minute to happen, but a minute that changed my life forever. Thankfully, my 3 children weren't seriously injured, but my wife was killed and I suffered a very serious brain injury in the accident that happened. I know that it happened at about 12 o'clock because a motorist who was driving behind the car phoned 999 and that call was logged at 3 minutes past 12. Obviously they need to give a bit of information, where are you, what's happened, and try and work things out. So it took a little while, you know, for the message to get through, and it was at 7 minutes past 12 that police were dispatched to the scene of the accident. The accident happened in Norfolk. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's quite a rural place. There's quite a lot of pigs and sugar beet and not many people. So how long did it take police to get to the scene? They were dispatched there at 7 minutes past 12 and nobody arrived until 9 minutes past. I've been lucky. I say that to people and they say to me, James, you hit a tree at 50 miles an hour, you're not lucky. Well, after that, I was lucky. And my first stroke of luck is that a member of the Norfolk Constabulary was following a baddie down the road at the time of my accident. So he was there really quite quickly. And that's him. This is Sean. Sean was a member of the Armed Response Unit of Norfolk Police and he drove one of these powerful black police cars. They carry, as well as guns, some very sophisticated first aid equipment, defibrillator machines and oxygen and all sorts. When I met Sean, he said, yeah, my first aid kit wasn't in the car that day. The only useful thing he had was a pair of gloves. They turned out to be really quite useful. The first thing that Sean did was to kind of try and make the area as safe as he could. So he gave a fluorescent jacket to a member of the public and handed out some traffic cones to kind of stop other traffic coming past the scene. Made sure that the kids were kind of in safe hands and went to see what he could do. It didn't take him long to find there was nothing he could do for my wife. So he turned his attention to me, put on his gloves, got hold of my head and held it back. And he did that so that my airway was open and I could breathe. And that means that officially, Sean is the first person who saved my life that day. So thanks very much, mate. He said the most surprising thing was just how white somebody's skull is when you can see it through their head. Of course, just before he grabbed hold of my head, he sent out word that, hey, we might need a little bit more help come to the scene. And the fire brigade were next to arrive. And the fire brigade didn't come because, like in the movies, there's a big ball of flame and, you know, the car erupts in a dramatic scene, but because I'm in the car. Quite nice if I can get out, please. So the fire brigade needs to cut the roof off the car. After they cut the roof off, it looked like that. As you can see, quite a mess. I was in the passenger seat of the car, so nearest the front of the picture. Other people are coming to ambulances because there are quite a number of casualties. Lots of ambulances come to the scene. And the air ambulance, the East Anglian air ambulance, flew and landed in the middle of the road. Maybe you don't know, but all air ambulances that operate in England and Wales are charities. They're not part of the NHS. They're entirely dependent on public donations to keep them in operation. It takes about £6.5 million to keep the 2 air ambulances running East Anglia in operation. It's an interesting operation too because it doesn't just carry paramedics like normal land ambulances, but it carries a doctor as well. And that means 2 things. It means that when they land, they're in charge because the doctor outranks everybody else. And it means that they can do other things for the patient that normal ambulance wouldn't be able to do. I went to see them to say thank you, and I met Gemma. Gemma is the paramedic who treated me at the scene of the accident. And I had a good conversation with her and I asked her, you know, what did you do? What happened at the scene of the accident? And she said, well, we did a few things for you. Because there's a doctor on board the helicopter, we can put you to sleep so that they kind of sedated me and anaesthetised me at the scene, and that meant I had to be able to breathe, so they put a tube down my throat as well so that I could breathe. I said, that's interesting. Gemma, what else did you do? She said, well, we're a bit worried there was some damage to your chest, and you might have fluid or air outside your lungs, and that would mean you can't breathe very well. So you have to drain the chest. I said, that'll be why I've got those scars under my armpits, then, will it? She said, yeah, I did those. I said, did you do anything else, Gemma? You know, did the tube and the thing and the scars? She said, oh yeah, we put a hat on you. What? She said, yeah, you know, after a serious trauma like this, there's a real danger of thermal shock. If the core body temperature drops low in a patient, that can cause lots of complications. So they gave me one of these. It's just a sort of bubble wrap, really, but it's a very effective way of insulating a patient and reducing the risk of that thermal shock. So you just kind of wrap it round and, you know, stick it on head of said patient to kind of keep them warm. A fantastically simple device that can really help to save lives. It's also really useful if you ever need to post a head. So I said, Gemma, we had the hat and the armpits and anything else. She said, well, actually the very first thing we did was to take a quick snapshot of your condition at the scene. And they do that according to something called the Glasgow Coma scale. And the Coma scale really just records the patient's responses in different ways. And they're motor, are they moving, are they speaking, are they looking? So, you know, you'll have seen on the TV programmes, there's a patient lying on the ground and a doctor comes along with a nurse and they say, hello, John, you're right. And they're not doing that just sort of break the ice and start a conversation. You know, they're doing that in the hope that John will go, yeah, not too bad, thanks. Looking and speaking and moving. So it runs from 3 in a coma to 15 completely awake and alert. I hope that people in the room here tonight are 13, 14, kind of with me on this. Apparently I thrashed about a little bit. So I'm marked down as 3 to 5 in my notes. But that means I'm in a bad way, effectively comatose at the scene of the accident. So they load me into the back of the air ambulance and fly me about 60 miles to Addenbrooke's Hospital, which is in Cambridge. They didn't take me there just because they've got a body shop and a Burger King, that they have, but because that is the major trauma centre for my part of the country and is an internationally renowned centre for neurology and neurosurgery. If you've had a bang on the head in the east of England, you want to go there. So that's where they flew me. And I'm there by 5 to 3 and going into a scanner. They put me into a CT scanner. And a CT scanner is really just an X-ray machine. In a normal X-ray machine, we have the X-rays shining through and they'll pass through some parts of the body and be stopped by others and create an image. A CT scanner is just the same, but the X-ray source moves. So it shines and projects an image from every possible angle around the body. So this is me in the scanner. You can see the tube still down my throat. And because it's shining from every direction, it's not just creating a flat image like this, but actually 3-dimensional images of me. So there are no photographs of me when I was in hospital. You know, Facebook isn't first on your mind when you go to see your relative. But I can show you what I looked like from an image from the scanner. So there's my skull. You can see it's a little bit broken. And there's the tissue. My nose hadn't fallen off, they just didn't scan that part. Okay. So I have this big assessment of the CT scan, and they scan my whole body, because they want an overview of everything that's wrong with James. And they find quite a few things. So there's some scarring to one of my kidneys and my spleen, a little bleeding at the base of my spine. I seem to have cracked a rib. I've got, as we saw, some fractures to my skull, and I've got an injury to my brain as well. So we find out all these things, and now you need to know, well, what are your chances? What kind of state are you in? And to answer that question, I need to introduce you to something called the Corticosteroid Randomization After Significant Head Injury study. I've lots of acronyms I've come across in researching these things. This is perhaps one of the least tasteful of the acronyms you'll come across, the Corticosteroid Randomization After Significant Head Injury. It was a study of over 10,000 patients across the world. They looked at what condition they were in at the start and then how did they turn out further on down the road. It's online. You can Google it up, type in what you like and find out your chances. So I did. The first thing it asks you is, where are you? Now, clearly, if you're in a place with a sophisticated healthcare system, you're going to have a better chance, make a better outcome. And I was in the UK, where they have this thing called the NHS. I don't know if you've come across it. It's bloody brilliant. The next thing is your age. The older you are, generally speaking, the worse your outcome will be. But it only really starts to come into effect above the age of 40. And I was 39 at the time of the accident, so stroke of luck number 2. The next thing on there's a Coma score. We talked about that. I've been generous and called it 5. And then the pupils. So the other thing they do on the telly is when after they've shouted their name is they shine a light in their face. And what they're trying to do is to see if the pupils get smaller when a light is shone on them. And you probably all know that if you shine a light in your eye, the pupil will shrink. Did you know that if you shine a light in your eye, both pupils shrink? What they found with me is when they shone the light into my left eye, the pupil did shrink, but this one stayed the same. When they shone a light in this eye, nothing, but this one still shrunk. So only one of them was affected. Is there an injury that's outside the head, an extracranial injury? Yes, I've described some of those. And then they had a CT scan and there was some evidence of small areas of bleeding in the brain, these petechial hemorrhages. And there was a larger bleed, subarachnoid, it means under one of the membranes around the brain, the arachnoid. But there wasn't any major shift of the brain. It hadn't got completely mushed up inside my head. So we type it in and then you sort of close your eyes and press return and see what it says. It said that my risk of dying in 2 weeks was 16%. I'm told that's good. Doesn't sound great, does it? But apparently. My risk of an unfavourable outcome at 6 months is not good though. 65% chance of an unfavourable outcome. And you're all wondering, what does unfavourable outcome mean? We need to go back to our friends in Glasgow. As well as the Coma scale, they came up with an outcome scale. It measures your function after an injury or accident. I'd say that number 1 is fairly unfavourable. But clearly 1 to 4, that's unfavourable outcome. To be left disabled is not good. But hey, look, favourable on the right side of the chart. Right? Some of the more observant members of the audience might have noticed that maybe everything isn't quite as it should be with James. Got the Johnny Depp look going on. And you're right, it's kind of you to say, it does look cool. The ladies love it. But there's something going on clearly with my right eye. The eye is controlled by this huge network of nerves and muscles, the oculomotor nerves that come out the back of them. And after an accident like mine, it's not uncommon to get damage to nerves number 3 and 4. Oculomotor nerve number 3 controls the pupil. And we saw there was no reaction of my pupil before. It also controls the eyelid. And I had a very droopy upper eyelid for some time after the accident. It's called ptosis. And you can see on there a muscle label, the inferior rectus. You are allowed to giggle at that name. That pulls the eyeball down, and that muscle was actually trapped in one of those skull fractures that I had around my eye orbit, and it hasn't recovered completely, so I need to keep the patch on, otherwise I have double vision. And although you're beautiful people, I don't really want to see 2 of you slightly on top of each other, because that's a bit disturbing. Injury to the brain as well, as we've said. So here's a picture of my brain. The way these scans work is kind of just pushed backwards. So the big white thing you can see there is on the right-hand side at the front of my brain. And it's an area of bleeding and bruising to my brain. I also had some injury on the other side, on the left-hand side, and I've ringed a few of these smaller areas, that petechial hemorrhage that we talked about before. And actually, the left-hand side caused me more problems. We're used perhaps to hearing after stroke that one side of a patient might be affected. They might have paralysis down one side. I just had a bit of loss of sensation down the right-hand side of my body, to the extent where half my tongue felt different from the other half. Really quite clear-cut, straight down the middle. The left-hand side of the brain is also responsible in nearly everybody for speech and language. And I still sometimes have problems with language, which being a public speaker isn't great. I didn't have brain surgery in hospital, but I did have one of these fitted. It's a bolt, and you can see that it literally screws right down through the head. Because once we've found this injury in the brain, and you could see it in the pictures there, we can't just make it better. In fact, there's nothing at all that anybody can do to repair that damage. We just have to wait for it to heal. But we don't want it to get worse. So this bolt is designed to pick up signs that things might be getting a bit worse in the brain and causing further damage. So it was drilled, that's my skull, right through the top of my head, and it's measuring the pressure inside the skull. And if the pressure increases too much, that will restrict oxygen to parts of the brain, and clearly then we'll get further damage following on after that. A very simple device again, but really kind of crucial in avoiding these things. And the pressure in my head did rise quite high at one time, but I'm just given a drug to lower the pressure and kind of sort it out. So what happens then after a serious bang on the head? Well, the first thing is that everything is just kind of blank. And then, well, imagine this, you're writing that essay, right? It's got to be in tomorrow. But suddenly there's a power failure. Your computer shuts down. And then hopefully it will restart again. When it does, it will be in safe mode. And when it's in safe mode, you've lost any recent changes, haven't you? Yeah? And you can't access the full operating system of the computer. And it's the same with your brain. So when it restarts, we have a period called post-traumatic amnesia. And it's a period where you just can't store new memories. And that post-traumatic amnesia is so common that rather than look at a patient and say, you'll probably forget about a fortnight, instead you see how much time people have forgot and use that to classify the brain injury. So you can come up with a chart like this. So if the amnesia is very short, then we call the brain injury quite mild. I've lost about 3.5 weeks memory. So I'm officially very severe. During that time, I would have conversations with people and I'd know who they were and we'd do things, but now I don't remember any of that time at all. Because this duration is so important, it's very useful to test patients and talk to them and see if they're still in this amnesia or if they're kind of emerged out of it. So I'll show you one of the tests that I did. The idea is that you do this test over a period of time and see how people improve. And the abbreviated mental test has 10 questions, including an address that you must remember and then recall later on. And I've just picked a few of the questions out. You can see the sort of thing. So, how old are you? They asked me. I said 40 this year. And I got that right. This was about 2 weeks after the accident. Doing well. Where are you? I said Addenbrooke's, and as I've said, I was in that hospital, so it's looking good. What time is it, James? And I said 6:30. It was actually 1:30 in the afternoon. Anyone who's been in hospital for any length of time will know that you never know what time of day it is. Periodically someone will stab you in the stomach with a syringe, but apart from that you don't know. So what month is it then? Let's get a bit bigger. What month is it? I said April. It was February. Okay, what year is it then? Let's get really big. I said 1999. Maybe I just wanted to party, I don't know, but clearly wrong. Okay, a bit of general knowledge then. What year did World War I start? You can tell us that. I said 1914, so I got that one right. These older memories still stored there. And another very common question in these sorts of tests, who's on the throne? And I said, King Charles. If you score less than 6, you have, quote, severe deficit. And I scored 5 the first time I took this test. I retook it again a few days later and my score improved. I didn't say King Charles either. King Charles II. So that's a short-term thing, this kind of period of amnesia. What about longer-term effects after brain injury? And they tend to be grouped into 3 categories, really. You have psychiatric things. So you might have changes in personality and behaviour. You might have episodes of paranoia and things like that. And thankfully, I don't seem to have had any effects in that area. The other area are physical changes. If you've had damage to the motor parts of the brain, you might have very obvious physical deficit in that you can't move your arm or your leg anymore. I didn't have those, but I do have another very common physical effect, which is fatigue. So you get enormously tired. And you don't get tired because you've been for a run. You're more likely to get tired because you thought about going for a run, or you're starting to worry about it. So switching attention from one thing to another is really difficult, multitasking. I'm a man to start with, right? That's hard. There's some very interesting research. They got people into an MRI scanner and scanned people with a head injury and people without doing simple tasks. If you've had a brain injury, more of the brain is activated. It's literally working harder to do the same thing. So maybe that's why I get so tired. If I get very tired, my speech is also affected. I know you're sitting there thinking there's nothing wrong with the guy. Patch is cool, nothing there. If you see me when I'm very tired, I might talk like that. So my speech will become very laboured. I lose verbal fluency. I might also find a bit of right-hand side weakness come back, and my gait will be a bit disrupted too. So in order to try and avoid that fatigue, I need to be very careful about how I plan and manage my time. The other area are psychological things, and that's to do with memory and concentration and verbal fluency. We'll probably come into that category, and visual perception of things too. And to test those and see how they're changing over time, very simple tests are done on patients. So one day I'm sitting in my hospital bed and nurse comes and sits in the end. She says, I just want to do a simple test on you, please, James. You have it here? I just want you to think of some words that start with the letter P. Okay? I'll give you a minute, see how many words you can get. Okay. Pickle. Perhaps. Penguin. And I just dried up. For what seemed like forever. It can only have been a few seconds because the whole test was a minute, but I dried up and then I looked straight at her and said, plump! And now my mind is racing and I say, pretty! Not helping! So, simple test though, to see for these kind of psychological changes, how are things kind of developing. And over time, those things have shown good improvement in me. So where am I now? Well, back to work. I can only work part-time and I need to manage my time very, very carefully, but I can work again, so that's great. Kids doing really, really well. They sort of amaze me and annoy me and drive me mad and make me incredibly proud and do all the things that kids are supposed to do. You know. At the end of last year, I remarried and I'm building new memories with my new family and you know, that's great stuff. So that kind of leaves me with the question that I suppose is burning on everybody's lips and has been for the last 20 minutes or so. Why would you come here and stand in front of a group of people and tell them all this weird stuff? And that's because I've learned some things. I've learned that your life can change or end in a moment, so really value it. And your brain is a really precious, delicate thing, so look after it. And when you're faced with a whole load of hardship and troubles ahead of you, don't despair at how far you've got to go on that journey, but look back and see just how far you've come. Thank you.